beg your forbearance, but I'm an old geezer and these machines never work for me. So I will do my best to speak up. I bring you greetings from your sisters and brothers at South Fork Church. Oh, I'm doing it. Here we go. South Fork Church is an interesting place. I've only been there a little over a year. As an old German Methodist church, they have found that the community of which they're a part is moving in a direction that they cannot go. So they ask your prayers as they work to disaffiliate themselves from that direction and seek our Savior's direction for the direction they should go. Prayer is always a good thing, and we ask our friends for it. When the Ministerial Alliance informed me, since I'm new to this group, that there was a pulpit exchange in the works, and I said to myself, well, I'm an old retired geezer. I've been on the shelf for a while, and which church am I going to draw? And your pastor smiled and he says, you can come to mine. We're the Southern Baptist Church. And I said to myself, oh, you see, my wife, with whom I've been, how to say this diplomatically, overjoyed to have her running the show for 50 years. She was raised in the Air Force. Her father was a career NCO, and she spent 3 years off Clark Air Base in the Philippines. And her most famous memory of that 3-year time, late 1960s, and some of you remember what those days were like, with 500,000 American soldiers across the bay. Well, there was a Sunday that was Communion Sunday, and all of the chaplains were out but one. And he was the Southern Baptist chaplain, and he was absolutely adamant that he would only serve communion to registered Southern Baptists, because that was the way it was done back in those days. Now, this is 50 years ago, trust me. And the base commander called him in and learned him the facts of life, of what it meant to be an officer. And you did what you was told. He was not a happy camper. And everybody learned that in the body of Christ, we have a master and he commands and we obey. End of discussion. So my career, which spanned a number of years with the United Methodist Church, ending in 2017, when I retired. Yay! And discovered that in Jesus there ain't no such thing. That once you're on, and he'll use you until he's used you. And I suspect that when we all get to heaven, it ain't going to be sitting on a cloud and sipping mint juleps. When Jesus told the story about the 3 servants, the one who got the 5 talenta, and the one that got the 2, and the one that got the 1, and they all went out and did their thing, and the master comes back, and the guy that had the 5, he had doubled his money, and master says, well done. You've been faithful with little things. Now I've got some big jobs for you. I've got these 5 cities you need to take care of. And he said, oh, good story. Well, that's my story. So I'm still in the trenches. What should I preach to a church I've never been at, don't know a soul, and your pastor says, go get him? See, I'm setting him up for some real explanations next week. And I said to myself, well, the first lesson I learned in seminary, being from the West Coast, logging communities, sawdust savages, blue collar, dirt under your fingernails, hard labor, coming back to seminary in Kentucky and going to my first student church out in the bluegrass and discovering that they was different kinds of folks there. And they decided after a couple months that no, I wasn't what they expected and I should go somewhere else. And when the dust settled, I had given them my 60 days notice, and they said, wait a minute, does that mean we have to pay you? Well, it's your bylaws. So I got to preach for 2 months after I was dismissed. Most surreal experience I've ever had. And I decided maybe I should stick with the lectionary. Not to preach what I want to preach, but preach what the Bible says I should preach on a week-by-week, giggy basis. And see where the Spirit leads. And I've been trying to do that now for 40 years. So what's the lesson for today in this book? Well, wouldn't you guess it? It's Luke 15. And that's where we're going to go. All the tax farmers and notorious sinners were all gathering around Jesus to listen to what he had to say. And the Pharisees and legal experts were grumbling to themselves, saying, "This man welcomes sinners, and he even has dinner with them." And Jesus, with his ears out, hearing all this, he leads into a couple of stories. And the lectionary ignores the first two and jumps straight to the third, but I'm going to talk about the first two in a little bit. A certain man had 2 sons. The younger son said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the inheritance." So the father divided his estate between his 2 boys. And soon afterward, the younger son gathered everything he owned together, liquidated it, and took the cash, and took a trip to a land far, far away. And there he squandered his wealth through extravagant living. And when he'd used up all of his resources, a severe food shortage hit that country, and he began to find himself at the short end of the stick. That's me. That's not the scriptures. He hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him out to the fields to slop the hogs. This is a good Jewish boy. Wait a minute. Hogs? Something about the law there. He was longing to eat the pods that he was feeding the hogs, and nobody gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "Wait a minute. How many of my father's hired hands have more than enough food, but I'm starving to death here? I'll go back to my father and I'll confess it. I'll fess up. I've sinned. I've sinned against you. I've sinned against God. I don't belong here. I'm not worthy to a place in your family. Would you give me a job? Take me on as one of your hired hands." And so he got up and he started his journey back. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Moved by compassion, he ran to the boy, hugged him, and kissed him, and his son began his set speech. Here it comes. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son." But his father cut him off. Called the servants, "Quickly, take this boy down to the mudroom and clean him up and put a new robe on him. Give him those fancy leather sandals. Get the diamond pinky ring out of the jewelry box and put it on his hand. Fetch that calf we've been fattening up for a special occasion and butcher it out. I want to have steaks on the barbie." That's me. That's not the Bible. We need to celebrate with a party to end all parties, because this son of mine was dead. He's come back to life. He was lost, and now he's found. And the celebration began. And usually that's where we stop. But Jesus goes on. The older son was still out in the field doing his chores. That's me. That's not the Bible. At the end of the day, he comes towards the house and he sees celebration going on. He hears music and dancing, and he calls one of the servants over and says, "What's going on?" And the servant replied, "Your brother has come home, and your father has slaughtered the fatted calf because he received his son back safe and sound." And the older son was outraged. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I know about that. And he decided there was no way on earth he was going to go join that party. But his father came to him and begged him. Think about that for a minute. And he responds to his father, "Look, I've slaved for you all these years. I've never disobeyed a single instruction you've given me, but you've never given me so much as a young goat so I could have a party with some of my friends. But this son of yours comes back after gobbling up your estate on ladies of ill repute." I won't use the word that the scripture says. "And you slaughter the fatted calf for him." And his father replies, "Son, you're always at my side. Everything I have is yours already. But we must celebrate and be glad because your brother was dead, and now he is back alive. He was lost, and he's now been found." And Jesus leaves the story hanging for us. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. The summer I retired, I let go. I was planning to serve until I was 72. It's 2017, I was 69. But my mother was quite seriously ill. She was in hospital. She was losing blood. She was losing weight. She wasn't eating. And I thought to myself, I better get my rear end back to the West Coast. There's some need there. By the time I got there, the doctors had discovered she had a little ulcer. Nobody had noticed it, and she was bleeding out inside. 2 stitches, fixed it up, through rehab, and she's in a care center and just doing fine. She'll be 94 next month. Still moving and grooving. So 3 years there. Now, 2-3 months after we arrived, COVID hit. And she's in a care center, and they locked the doors. I couldn't get in to see her. Our son, who is partially handicapped, still lives back here in Carlinville. So after 3 years of not getting to see my mom, why are we here? We came back thinking just all I have to do is hide in the tall grass. And the first church that we showed up at, I just happened to have the district superintendent sitting in the pew right next to me. So here I am preaching again. While we were out there, watching a lot of television, because what can you do when it's COVID and you can't go anywhere or do anything? Public television was showing an Australian soap opera, which we don't see in American television very often. It's called A Place Called Home. It's set in the late 1940s, just after World War II. And people in this small village just outside of Melbourne, big city, who had scattered to fight the war, and they have gone through unbelievable experiences, terrible things. A couple of them come back from Japanese prison camps, and they are skin and bones. One lady comes back. She had gotten caught up in France, and her husband was a resistance fighter, and he'd been captured, and she thought he was dead, but he wasn't. So we have people coming back to where they think they belong, the home that they had to leave to go defend their friends, but it's not the same. Something has changed. They are not the same. They've gone through trauma. They've gone through pain. They've gone through terrible experiences. We call it PTSD now. Used to call it shell shock and all that stuff, but now we call it something else. People whose lives have been totally upset, upended, trampled on. And they're trying to put their lives back together, and they think if they can just get home, it'll all be okay, only it's not. So here we are, Jesus in the middle of Lent, 40 days as we walk with Jesus towards his destiny. He's on his way to Jerusalem. He is going to do something there that's going to change the planet and alter every one of our lives. And we're walking with him thinking he's going to get a crown, he's going to wield a scepter, he's going to sit on a throne, and we're going to be right there with him. Hot dog. We're going to beat the Romans with a stick. Not necessarily. On the road, we pass from Galilee, and the Pharisees there, who are disciples of Shammai, very conservative, very Bible-centered, down into Judea, where the Pharisees follow Hillel. Much more loosey-goosey, much more let's change things. And that means Jesus coming out of Galilee has already got 2 strikes against him with the religious leaders down in Judea. They want to hear what this guy has to say, but they're ready to check the marks off that he isn't doing it right, i.e. their way. We've got denominationalism going in the 1st century. We don't even have Christianity yet. So the Pharisees are listening. They're paying attention. They see this guy from far away, never went to the university, didn't go to seminary. Where does he get all this stuff? When he comes to town, sick people get well. People who have mental disorders, demon possession, they get themselves cleaned up. God has to be with this guy, but he's saying crazy things. He's taking on the Bible and doing some really weird stuff, and we're not sure. It's sort of like John the Baptist's disciples sending to Jesus, Jesus, we're confused. Are you really the one that John thought you are? The one that God sent to make everything right? Or should we wait and look for somebody else? And then you have the grumbling starting. And it's going to get serious before we get to Jerusalem. And by the time we do, there are plots afoot to put this guy down. This is not religious stuff. This is politics. This is economics. This is social distress. This is all kinds of our lives that we live. So, the question we have with this text: why do these Pharisees find Jesus so problematic? What's the issue here? Well, they know that old phrase, evil companions corrupt good morals. We've heard that preached. I've heard it preached a lot in the church I grew up in. Good old conservative church Christ. Boy, we're more righteous than thou. Bertha better than you kind of church members. And Paul himself quotes that passage from a Greek poet, wanting to tell the Christians, now you be careful who you hang out with. Hanging out with those motorcycle riders that have 2 fists and they use them both and they smoke like a chimney and drink like a fish, man, you hang out with them and people are going to start wondering what kind of people you are. And that's where Jesus seems to graduate. Wait a minute. Well, we're walking through the wilderness experience in Lent, like Jesus was out in the wilderness for 40 days duking it out with somebody else. That nice whispering little voice that wants to lead us down paths that look so good from a distance until we get to the end of them. You know, like that long black train and its only destination is the middle of nowhere. You remember that song? Yeah. Well, to be in discipline, to pray, to obey what the scriptures say, and do all the things that you're told are the right things to do. You never tell a lie, and you never cheat or steal, and you don't smoke, and you don't chew, and don't associate with them that do. Those are the Pharisees. Those are the kind of people that I was taught in seminary we wanted in our churches. They're the good people. They're the salt of the earth. They're the pillars that will hold society together. And Jesus comes preaching this, you're forgiven, it's okay. And we say, wait a minute. Wait just a minute. Sin comes at a cost. Sin works really hard to get paid its wages. And what are the wages of sin? Somebody? You got it. And sin ain't going to be stopped until it gets paid in full. Okay. So, if somebody comes and saying, that's okay, that's all right, I'll just kiss it and make it better, that may work for a 3-year-old. But it ain't going to work for these churchgoers. They've been reading the Bible too much. They've been out there fighting the good fight in the trenches too long. They know that cheap grace, a forgiveness of sin that does not call for some dealing with the consequences of sin, is no forgiveness at all. And it's not grace either. One of my teachers, who died before I was born, worked in an underground seminary training pastors in the middle of Nazi Germany, moving from place to place every 3 weeks, one step ahead of the secret police, gathered together his class notes for ethics, called it The Cost of Discipleship. And in it he writes that when Jesus calls a person, he calls him to come and die. To let go. This world, let go. Your pride, let go. Your sense of self-importance, let go. If Jesus is all and in all, and there's nothing else, oh, wait a minute. Nobody ever preached that to me when I was 14, thinking seriously about coming down the aisle and making my profession of faith and being baptized in that baptistry up behind the pulpit. Somebody should have. I don't know if I'd be the same person today if somebody had, but when Jesus gets hold of you, he don't let go. Trust me. And so, here we have people who look good, who talk a good talk, they wear the right clothes, and their name is Elmer Gantry. For those of you who remember that old novel by Upton Sinclair, or Sinclair Lewis, I never got those two straightened out. He was the cheapster who faked it. He would preach a good story, and then he'd take the offering tray and sneak off with it. We have to look deeper than the appearance of things. Jesus looks at the heart, and his Spirit is in us. So we don't take anything at face value. We go for the reality. Grace is deep, and grace is hard. And walking with Jesus means heading to Jerusalem, and there's going to be a coronation there. There's going to be an enthronement there. A scepter is waiting there, but it isn't what we think. Nobody expects a crown of thorns. Nobody expects a scepter that's a broken reed. And nobody expects a throne that's a cross with nails and hammers. Nobody but Jesus. And he's going there anyway. And so, how does Jesus answer the good church people who aren't too sure about whether they should follow this guy? He may be leading them into a hole. He may be leading them into deception. He may be the devil in disguise. After all, Beelzebub can cast out demons. He's the prince. They've asked the question, and here's the answer. Once there was a shepherd, and he had some sheep. And he took care of the sheep, and he worked 24/7. He had his sleeves rolled up, and he had dirt under his fingernails and muddy boots and sweat under his armpits. And one day he discovers that one of those sheep is missing. He's got a count. He's got a head on his shoulders. He knows how many there are, and one's not there. So he calls the dogs in, and they round the flock up, and they're going to keep watch and make sure the wolves and the tigers and the lions and the bears stay away. And he's going to go find that lost lamb. And when he does, and he comes back, and the whole flock is together, and they get down to the pen, there's going to be a party. Yowza. Lost, found, celebrate. That's the name of the game. But a shepherd, to the good, righteous people in the first century, is a person who works 24/7 at some hands-on job. He doesn't have time to spend 3 hours a day in this book. He doesn't have time to spend 2 hours a day in prayer. He doesn't have time to take ritual baths 3 times a day so he's ritually clean, like the priests do. All those laws in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, he can't obey any of those. So he's Am Haaretz. He's the great unwashed. He's the guy who sits in the back of the synagogue so the odor of sanctity doesn't disturb us good folk up front. Second story. There was a woman. She had 10 silver coins. That was her whole assets, probably her dowry. And she goes to her jewelry box and she's counting them out, and there's only 9. Wait a minute, where's the missing coin? And she finds it, and she puts it back in the jewelry box, counts them again. Yep, got all 10. Calls the other ladies together. We're going to have a coffee klatch, and we're going to celebrate. Lost, found, celebrate. But women in the synagogue to this day sit in the balcony behind a screen wearing a veil. The Apostle Paul tells Christians in the letter to Timothy, women, cover your hair. If you got a question, ask your husband when you get home. Keep your mouths shut in church. What? That's Orthodox Judaism. Now, I'm in the United Methodist Church now. We don't do that. We have learned that God speaks through women sometimes. Please forgive me if I'm stepping on toes here. But we learned the hard way. Most of what I preach comes out of the mouth of Elda Lohman, who taught me when I was 6 years old. Saint, now with the Lord. But man, that was a woman who was dedicated. And then the third story. A certain man had 2 sons. Oh, we know that story. Adam had 2 sons, Cain and Abel, and Cain had to leave home. Why did he have to leave home? He murdered his brother. And what does God say to Cain? You're going to have to take your brother's place. You're going to be a wanderer now. You're not going to be a farmer and tend the fields. You're going to follow the sheep and take care of the goats. And you're going to go where they go. And I'll put a mark on you just to be sure you remember it. And what does Cain do? Well, he heads out eastward of Eden into the land of wandering, Nod, and builds a city. Big stone walls, big heavy wooden gates. Keep God out, and I can run the show in here just fine, thank you. But that's not the story Jesus tells. Who else do we know that has a father who has 2 sons? Well, Abraham has 2 sons, Ishmael and Isaac. And Ishmael has to leave home. Well, it's because Abraham's wife is absolutely assertive about her son Isaac is the heir, and this other boy that you had with this slave girl, no, get rid of him. And God finally has to take Abraham aside and say, do what Sarah tells you. My promise to you and her was through her son, not through this other one, but I've been listening to your prayer, and I'm taking it seriously. I promise you, I'll bless this other boy. He's going to have 12 sons, and every one of them is going to be rough and tough and have all the right stuff. They're going to be the ancestors of clans, and he will give birth to a nation of his own. But that's not the plan I had in mind for you and your wife. Isaac is the one I choose. My covenant's through him. And Isaac has two sons, Esau and Jacob. Esau, the glory of his daddy's eyes, looks just like it. Red hair, big, bulging, a hunter and a fisherman, an outdoors boy. He's an extrovert par excellence. And Isaac loves him. But Jacob is his mother's boy. Darker, quieter, sneaky, conniving, a liar, a cheat, and a thief. And he has to leave home too. Why? Because he's stolen some of the most valuable things that the family has. His brother's birthright and his father's blessing. But that's not the story Jesus tells. He tells a story that hits every one of us right where we are. Because most of us have a family member who has fouled up big time. I mean, really el stupido fouled up. And they go to the parent and they say, Dad, let me level with you. It ain't working here. I am so sick of Big Brother bossing me around and trying to get me to do all this scut work that I can't do very well and don't want to do it all anyway. I don't want to wait until you die to get what I have coming to me. Split the inheritance now and let me get on with my life, which is the same thing as saying to your father, I wish you were dead. Now, in Judaism, that is a capital crime. To diss off your parent that way. The law says, if that word gets out, the villagers gather together and grab that kid, drag him outside the village, and they stone him to death. The law says, honor your father and your mother. Period. Exclamation point. And this kid is really off the scale. But Dad does it. He calls the accountants in, splits the estate, which means Big Brother has gotten his double portion. He's the eldest. He's responsible for taking care of the elderly parents. And Dad retires. That's why he's sitting on the front porch sipping his tall cool, and Big Brother is out there handling the affair. Well, when Baby Brother gets his share and he liquidates it, that leaves Big Brother required to answer all the contracts with 2/3 of the assets. And that means they're in trouble. He's going to have to work like a slave to pull this estate out of the hole, but he does it. He gets it done. He's taking care of business and working every day. The Baby Brother runs off, and he thinks for a while, this is heaven. I get to sit on a cloud and play a harp and have all the angels around me, and it's just going to be wonderful. I got more friends than I could beat off with a stick. Until October 1929, when the bottom drops out of the stock market and all the banks close. And Baby Brother goes to his bank to draw on some of his assets, and there's a big close sign in the window because the bank manager has looked at the debits and the assets, and they don't have enough cash in the vault to pay off the loans that are outstanding, and nobody out there that borrowed money can pay them back. So the bank manager just grabs the cash that's left and he moves to Florida. My father used to tell stories about that in 1933, 1934, 1935 in Wyoming and Nebraska, where that happened. Yeah. So Baby Brother is in a real hard place. He's in a foreign country. He's an illegal alien. He doesn't have a green card. And the immigration service is after him. Well, maybe not. This is the first century after all. And I don't want to get too far out of field. But, interestingly enough, he has a brainstorm. I'm slopping hogs. Not exactly the job I thought I was going to be doing when I came here with all that money. And I've got calluses on my calluses. I've learned that I can work real hard. I can, and I do. And you know, I know people who are a whole lot better off than I am now, and they all work for my dad back home. And my dad's a fair dude. If I'm prepared to honest up, to let him know that I've changed a little, I may not be changed enough, but I've changed a little, I'm ready to work now. It's clear I'm not ready to be your son. I don't have the right to be called your son. That's just truth. And I'll own that. But I will ask for a job. And then it's all on Dad. And Dad ain't having it. Why? We're going to shift the whole perspective now. Dad is looking at his household, and it lies in pieces like a bowl that has been shattered in the kitchen when we dropped it. And he's wondering, can we ever put these pieces back together and have a household, a home again? And he's sitting on the porch and he's praying at it. And he sees somebody coming way down at the far end of the driveway, and he runs. Oh, Lord God of heaven, it's my boy. I thought he was dead, but he's alive. And I have a second chance. Now, the villagers are going to take this kid out and they're going to off him because that's what the law requires. We're talking Moses here. So I need to make it real clear to everybody that that's not in the cards. This is my son. End of discussion. Now, how we're going to work this out in the household, we'll deal with that after the party's over. But the party is to make sure everybody understands that I'm working as hard as I can to put this broken family back together. And that's why it's so important for me to take Big Brother seriously. I was raised to be the straight arrow, to be holier than thou, never do anything wrong. Why, when I applied for college and they asked me to fill out the do you need money to go to college, I honestly wrote down everything that I had scrimped and saved up for. And because I had a couple $1,000s in the bank, I didn't need any financial aid, and so I didn't get any. And the other high school students who had blown theirs on cars and parties and fun, they didn't have any savings, so they had a financial need and they got thousands of dollars in scholarships. That's what happens when you're a Pharisee and you do what's right. No good deed goes unpunished. That's not in the Bible, but it's true. So, Big Brother sees the party going on, and what is going through his head? First, that this scoundrel, this ne'er-do-well, this layabout is back, and Daddy is doing the same old that he did back then. Why should I put up with this anymore? Why am I working 12-hour days, 6 days a week to keep this estate going when this old fool is just going to blow it on this nobody? And so Big Brother sits down. He has had a revelation coming from somewhere way out in left field. Nobody has been paying any attention to him. Nobody has been saying thank you to him. Nobody has been giving him squat. And that's why it's so important for Jesus to tell us that the Father leaves the party and goes out to see Big Brother. He doesn't leave home to go looking for little brother. He's sitting there on the porch. But when he finds out that Big Brother's down by the barn sulking, he doesn't go down there to shake his finger and tell Big Brother to get straighten up and fly right. He goes out to beg. Please come in. And then Big Brother lowers the boom. You don't love me, do you? You don't respect me. You don't care a word about me. All my life I've worked like a slave, and you've never seen it. You've never cared about it. You just take it for granted. That's anguish. That is grief. That is pain. And I hear it. When my sister was 15 years old, she was working in the nursery in our home church. The high school youth group was planning a snow getaway, and each one could invite one friend. So she invited one of her friends. When the bus arrived to gather everybody up, 4 cheerleaders from the high school cheerleading squad who never attended our church at all showed up. And oh, we were so excited to have them go on this ski trip with our group. Rita, would you and your friend be willing to give up your seats? My sister has not set foot inside a church for 50 years because of that. Good people don't always finish first. The enemy will do whatever he can, and he does it in church. We have seen it. Some of us have experienced it. And it hurts. And Daddy looks at Big Brother and he says, "You're my son. I trust you with everything. It's yours already. You don't have to ask my permission. Do what you want. But if you have a party with your friends, would you remember to invite me so I can meet some of them? I haven't done very well by either of my boys, but if we're ever going to put this family back together, if we're going to take these fragments, these pieces, and weld them together with that gold like the Japanese do in that special art that takes a fragmented pottery piece and melds it into something new and then reglazes it and refires it, and you have a new pot that's just as good as the old one, only it's a work of art now. It's better than it was before. If we can get through the pain, past the forgiveness, into grace. Because it's the Father who is trying every way he knows to make a place that everyone will call home. Perhaps the song that I need to sing a lot more than I do is that old Sunday school song that some of us may remember. Come and go with me to my Father's house. To my Father's house. To my Father's house. Come and go with me to my Father's house. There'll be joy, 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 and maybe, just maybe by God's grace, a place when we and all of our friends can be at home.